Okay, moving on to question number 2. How do you progress aerobic training?
Will I kick this off?
Kick it off.
I think just like, I mean, this could obviously be a very lengthy conversation. We could probably take up 60 minutes just on this, but I think just general guidelines that we're thinking of, where you've got to start someone from really long and slow, and you're going to progress them to short and fast. That's a general framework and the general continuum that you're going to start with. In terms of equipment and modalities, well, we use a framework, it's called like the 4 C's. So we want to start with cyclical. Right.
What does that mean?
So cyclical would be like just a cyclical piece of equipment. So monostructural. So like a rower, air bike, assault bike, ski erg, running. Choose one. Mm-hmm. Start really long and slow and progress that to short and fast.
Yeah.
Then maybe add in a second piece of cyclical equipment, whether that be rowing and assault bike. Progress that. Once we get really good there, then we can move that into like a circuit. So we can maybe add like another modality, which maybe something like body weight. So it's maybe like row, ski erg, air squats, and you're just in that circuit fashion, and you're just progressing that along that framework, which remind me again starts with cyclical, circuit, chipper, constant variance. I nailed that there. Nice.
We had a bit of a mental block the other day trying to think of that.
We did, yeah. It was the first one we couldn't think of. Cyclical, we're like, where's that?
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about like why do we start long and why do we go from long to short? And I think a lot of this is, okay, number one is to do like foundations in the same concept, in the same way we talked about the strength continuum, starting with like lighter, less intense, higher volume. The same has to be applied to the aerobic system. But I think also from like an awareness of pacing. That's such a big thing that everyone needs to be aware of, even if it's not a sport that you're doing. It's essential when we talk about aerobic training, we're trying to think about sustainable, repeatable work. And that's a really important facet we need to understand. Aerobic training does not mean going as hard as you possibly can, so that when you complete the distance or the time that you've set, you cannot do any more. And when we start to get into that realm, we're now kind of starting to get into kind of anaerobic training on what we would call non-sustainable training. So to understand how to make 10 minutes of work sustainable or how to make a 2K run sustainable, we need to have some knowledge, some awareness of a pace that we need to hold to make that appropriate. So generally speaking, we start by going longer and going slower, and it's a lot easier for us to know how to go faster. It's a lot harder for us to know how to go slower, because we don't, once you've gone over that red line and you know, beyond the point of return, we've all been there at some point, it's very hard to know how you could have done that better. So generally speaking, like, we always want to be working somewhat sub-maximally with our aerobic training, and we start longer and slower, and we always know, okay, it's simple. If we're working, if the distance is reduced or the time that I need to work for is reduced, I can just go a little bit faster than I did last week, and so on and so forth. Anything to add on that?
Pretty much it.
Awesome. So generally speaking, start long, start slow. That might even mean walking for someone who's never done aerobic training before. And over time, you're going to reduce the distance or the time domain and increase the intensity.
Nice.
And again, you know, once you're working with someone who's maybe more intermediate and advanced, perhaps you don't need to go through that whole process anymore. You can kind of just jump in anywhere. But of course, you've got to develop that system first.